Imagine waking up one day and realizing that everything you've believed about happiness, success, morality, even your own freedom, wasn't really yours. It wasn't forged in the fires of your own thought. It was handed to you, quietly, over years, through praise and punishment, applause and silence, billboards and algorithms. Every opinion you hold, every desire you chase, every shame you carry, it all fits so perfectly into the world's puzzle, doesn't it? And you, the supposed freethinker, the modern individual, the conscious agent, you're just a piece that learned to love its shape. Now pause. Ask yourself this. What if the life you're living isn't a lie, but worse, a dream you were never conscious enough to question? Dostoyevsky questioned it. In a time when the modern world was still being born, when cities were rising, ideologies were warring, and man was beginning to worship science over soul, Dostoyevsky stared into the smoke and machinery of progress and saw something terrifying: that we were becoming less human in our pursuit of becoming more perfect. He saw a future, our present, where people would confuse comfort for purpose, logic for truth, and efficiency for meaning. A world where the soul becomes background noise, where the internal chaos of being alive is muted under the soft hum of convenience and control. A world where your suffering is diagnosed before it's felt, medicated before it's understood, and eliminated before it can teach you anything real. Does that sound familiar? Here's the paradox. We live in an age where we are freer than ever, and yet more anxious, more medicated, more divided, and more numb. We scroll endlessly for connection, but feel lonelier than ever. We're constantly told to be ourselves, yet handed filters, labels, and lifestyles prepackaged by culture. How can a society be so advanced, and yet its people feel so lost? Dostoyevsky understood something most thinkers didn't dare to touch: that the human soul is not a problem to be solved, but a mystery to be lived. That our attempts to fix human nature through reason alone would inevitably strip it of everything that makes it beautiful: its contradictions, its passions, its suffering, its madness. He saw that in the pursuit of a perfectly ordered world, we would amputate the parts of ourselves that don't fit the system. That one day, we would look in the mirror and see only roles, identities, and performances, but no soul. And so the question isn't, are we free? It's, who gave you the definition of freedom you live by? The question isn't, are you happy? It's, who taught you what happiness is and what it isn't? The illusions of modern life aren't flashy. They're not loud. They don't scream at you. They whisper. They assume. And that's what makes them so powerful. We weren't programmed to ask, why do I feel numb when everything looks fine? Why do I fear silence more than failure? Why does comfort make me anxious after a while? But Dostoyevsky did, and not just with ideas, but with characters who bleed, suffer, and implode in the face of their own illusions. Raskolnikov, Ivan Karamazov, the underground man. These weren't just fictional people. They were mirrors. Distorted, yes, but honest. What if we need to descend into the chaos of our own contradictions to see clearly? What if being well-adjusted in a broken society is the real insanity? And what if the discomfort you feel late at night, the low hum of unease, the quiet suspicion that something's not right, isn't a symptom to be silenced, but a signal to be heard? You were born into a world that handed you a mask before you could even speak. It came with a name, a set of expectations, and a quiet warning. Do not remove this in public. Smile when spoken to. Work hard. Don't ask too many questions, and you'll be rewarded. Be agreeable. Be desirable. Be useful. But Dostoyevsky knew, behind every well-behaved citizen is a soul screaming to be real. The illusion of modern life begins not with the external world, but with the internal conditioning that tells you what kind of person you must become in order to be accepted, to belong, to survive. The tragedy: you begin to believe that the mask is your face. This is what Carl Jung later called the persona, the socially acceptable identity we present to the world. But behind the persona lies something far more volatile: the shadow. All the parts of ourselves we've denied, hidden, or repressed in order to fit in. And society rewards the mask. It gives attention, approval, even love, but only if you play the part well. Dostoyevsky, long before Jung, saw this inner split playing out in the characters of his novels. He understood that modern man was becoming divided, outwardly rational, obedient, and progressive, but inwardly tormented, resentful, and deeply confused. Take the underground man, for example, a character who mocks his own intelligence, sabotages his own happiness, and refuses every logical path offered to him. He doesn't want peace. He wants freedom. And not the kind that fits neatly into a government-issued definition. He wants the freedom to contradict himself, to suffer, to be irrational, because only then does he feel real. Man only likes to count his troubles. He doesn't calculate his happiness. Dostoyevsky. Why? Because our suffering is one of the last things we still own. Everything else has been systematized. Even happiness has been commodified, sold to us as a product, a 5-step plan, an app notification. But suffering, that's primal, that's still human. And herein lies the core of the illusion. Modern life doesn't destroy the soul by attacking it. It dissolves it by sedating it. It numbs us with distractions, dopamine on demand, outrage on scroll, validation in hearts and likes. All of it designed not to connect you with others, but to disconnect you from yourself. You're not encouraged to reflect. You're trained to respond. You don't develop a worldview. You inherit one. You don't craft a value system. You download it. You don't wrestle with moral contradictions. You outsource them to ideology. Dostoyevsky saw the seeds of this in the 19th century. He warned of a future where man would become a cog in a perfectly functioning machine. A utopia where everything was efficient and nothing was sacred. He was terrified by what he called the Crystal Palace, a metaphor for a rationalist, sterile future where every desire could be calculated and every behavior predicted. But here's the deeper insight. A world without mystery is a world without meaning. When everything is explainable, predictable, and flattened by logic, the human soul loses its terrain. We are creatures not just of biology, but of myth, of longing, of contradiction. When we try to optimize away our darkness, we also kill our depth. That's why Dostoyevsky's characters are so disturbing. They force us to look in the mirror and ask, what part of myself have I buried in order to appear sane in an insane system? Philosophically, he wasn't just challenging modernity, he was challenging determinism. The belief that human beings are nothing more than complex biological machines reacting to input. In a world dominated by science and reason, this became a seductive idea. But if we are just machines, where is love? Where is guilt? Where is forgiveness? Where is the trembling beauty of a flawed person choosing to do good, not because of data or law, but because they must, even if it destroys them? If God is dead, then everything is permitted. Ivan Karamazov. This is the dark underbelly of modern freedom. When you remove the sacred, the transcendent, the mystery, all that's left is chaos wrapped in convenience. And so we become free, but anxious. Connected, but hollow. Smart, but soulless. Because we don't know who we are anymore, only who we're supposed to be. The real danger, Dostoyevsky warned, was not that we would lose ourselves through violence or oppression, but that we would slowly, quietly, comfortably dissolve in a society that taught us how to think, what to value, and how to feel, before we ever learned how to question. The most terrifying prison is the one you don't know you're in, and the hardest chains to break are the ones disguised as freedom. So what happens when this illusion takes hold? What are the real consequences, emotionally, culturally, spiritually, of a society? You may not notice it right away. It doesn't knock on your door or shout in your face. It creeps, slowly, quietly, into your mornings, into your scrolling thumb, into your silences. It lives in your reflexes, your choices, your sense of what matters. The illusion Dostoyevsky feared most wasn't some grand dystopia. It was this, greater than a world where the soul starves in a banquet of comfort. The modern person wakes up not with a scream, but with a screen, blue light, notifications, a flood of opinions before breakfast. Within minutes, you're in motion, not because you know where you're going, but because standing still feels unbearable. Stillness makes the illusion visible, so you keep moving. You go to school, to work, to therapy, to the gym. You smile, you follow, you express yourself within the limits of what's allowed. You create content, you consume, you grind, you rest just enough to keep going. You ask for advice, you collect mantras, you post about mental health. You say, "I'm tired," but what you really mean is, "I don't know what any of this is for." But no one says that out loud, because the system doesn't like that kind of question. It prefers manageable problems. Anxiety, here's a pill. Loneliness, here's an app. No purpose. Try productivity. Feel numb, here's a new identity. Depressed, maybe you're just not optimized yet. You begin to believe that the symptoms are the illness, and that your pain is just a glitch in an otherwise perfect machine. But Dostoyevsky knew better. He understood that pain isn't the enemy. It's a messenger, a signal, a protest from the soul. Pain and suffering are always inevitable for a large intelligence and a deep heart. Dostoyevsky. We tried to eliminate discomfort. He tried to understand it. We need answers. He explored broken questions. The consequence of ignoring this is more than just personal. It's cultural. When a society begins to fear suffering, it begins to fear depth. And when it fears depth, it becomes obsessed with surface. And so we live in a world of branding over being, of identity over integrity, of influence over insight. We curate our image while forgetting our substance. We speak in performance. We listen to respond. We love with conditions. We seek meaning, but fear commitment. We touch everything, but we feel almost nothing. This is the psychological fallout of the illusion. Emptiness disguised as freedom. You can do anything, be anyone, yet you feel like no one. Addiction disguised as choice. You think you're choosing what to consume, but you're just reacting to what was fed to you. Numbness disguised as peace. You call it calm, but it's just disconnection. You don't feel joy or pain, just a vague hum of distraction. Rebellion disguised as identity. You think you're being unique, but the system sells you identities by the dozen. You're still playing by its rules, only with different clothes. We don't live in Orwell's world of surveillance. We live in Huxley's world of seduction, not a boot on the neck, but a drip feed of dopamine that lulls the soul to sleep. What is hell? I maintain that it is the suffering of being unable to love. Dostoyevsky. Love, in Dostoyevsky's world, was not sentimental. It was sacrifice. Suffering for something bigger than yourself. choosing to care when you could just escape, speaking truth when lies are more profitable, forgiving when hatred is easier. But how can we love anything deeply in a world that teaches us to never suffer? We see this in modern relationships. Love becomes a transaction. Ghosting becomes normal. Vulnerability becomes cringe. We want connection, but not intimacy. We want passion, but not responsibility. We want validation, not reflection. Why? Because reflection hurts. It shows you the mask. It shows you the shadow. It shows you the cost of living a life you never chose. That's why Dostoyevsky's characters collapse. They carry the full weight of freedom and the unbearable cost of seeing too much. But they also remind us of something sacred. To suffer consciously is to be alive consciously. When we numb suffering, we also numb the path to awakening. When we silence our doubt, we kill our wisdom. When we trade mystery for efficiency, we don't become more advanced. We become hollow. And so the modern world becomes a maze with no exit. You don't even know what you're chasing anymore. Validation, belonging, status, relief. You just know something's missing, and you can't quite name it. But Dostoyevsky could. He called it the soul. So the question becomes, is there a way out of this illusion? Or are we destined to live our lives asleep, decorating the prison cell, calling it freedom? That brings us to what Dostoyevsky would have seen as the most radical move of all, the rebellion of the soul against the system. There is no manual for waking up from an illusion, no 10-step guide to reclaiming the soul. The rebellion Dostoyevsky points to is not loud, not glamorous, not easy. It is deeply personal, achingly honest, and begins in the quietest place of all, the mirror. Look at yourself, not your persona, not your curated identity, not your online avatar, but the part of you that resists your own conditioning, the part that whispers in moments of silence, "This isn't who I am." That whisper is where rebellion begins. It's not a protest sign. It's not an online rant. It's not a trendy spiritual hashtag. It's the act of choosing to feel when it's easier to numb, to question when it's safer to obey, and to stand still when the world is running nowhere. Dostoyevsky's characters don't find freedom through success. They find it through breakdown, through contradiction, guilt, and unbearable honesty. They wrestle with themselves until there is nothing left but truth, naked and dangerous. Man is sometimes extraordinarily, passionately in love with suffering. Dostoyevsky. Why? Because suffering burns away illusion. When you lose the job, the relationship, the dream, when you're stripped down to raw survival, you finally ask the forbidden question, who am I if I'm not performing? And that's where you begin. Not by becoming someone new, but by unbecoming everything you never chose to be. This is the rebellion, not outward destruction, but inward resurrection. Step 1. Embrace inner contradiction. We've been trained to crave coherence, to resolve discomfort, to present a stable identity. But Dostoyevsky reminds us, you are not a finished product. You are a battlefield. The underground man is both brilliant and self-sabotaging. Ivan Karamazov is both deeply moral and morally paralyzed. These contradictions are not flaws. They are spao, proof of freedom. The rebellion begins when you stop trying to fix yourself into a cohesive brand and start exploring yourself as a mystery. Let the paradoxes breathe. Let the confusion speak. Let yourself be real. Step 2. Reclaim suffering as sacred. In modern life, pain is treated like a disease, something to be hidden, silenced, eliminated. But Dostoyevsky saw pain as the forge of meaning. The darker the night, the brighter the stars, the deeper the grief, the closer is God. Dostoyevsky. To suffer consciously is to become fully alive. To suffer for truth, for love, for responsibility, is to re-enter the sacred. This doesn't mean glorifying suffering. It means not running from it, not covering it with distractions, not calling it weakness. The rebellion is choosing nabowidji, depth over comfort. Not because it feels good, but because it makes you real. Yobuwas. Step 3. Confront the shadow. Carl Jung said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." But that process demands going into the parts of yourself that you've disowned. Your rage, your envy, your cowardice, your ego, your shame. These are not your enemies. They are your map. Dostoyevsky's most powerful characters aren't good people. They are people who stop lying to themselves. They descend into the darkest corners of their minds and return with the terrifying truth that they are capable of everything they hate in others. And only then, through that confrontation, can they begin to act with real morality, not because they are told to, but because they have seen their own darkness and chosen otherwise. This is where real responsibility is born. Step 4. Choose meaning over happiness. The modern world is obsessed with feeling good, but Dostoyevsky knew a meaningful life is often an uncomfortable one. Meaning comes with sacrifice, with pain, with choices that go against the current of culture. It's easier to be agreeable than to be true. Easier to fit in than to stand alone. Easier to conform than to carry your cross. But happiness is fleeting. Meaning is eternal. Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and philosopher influenced by Dostoyevsky, wrote, "When a man finds that it is his destiny to suffer, he will have to accept his suffering as his task. Your suffering is not a glitch, it is the path. And only through walking it consciously can you find the kind of peace that doesn't depend on external validation." Step 5. Live as if the soul exists. This may be Dostoyevsky's most radical proposition, not to believe in something because science proves it, not to follow the crowd because it's safe, but to act as if the soul is real, and that your life is the only chance it has to speak through you. To live with conscience, to live with awe, to live with radical responsibility. Not because you have to, but because you choose to. This is the rebellion, not a fight against the system, but a fight for the soul. You may lose friends. What happens when the illusion collapses? What do you find when all the masks are gone? When all the false comforts burn away? When you're left not with a role, a job title, or a name, but with something wordless, pulsing, and alive within you? You meet the soul. And what the soul says is simple, but devastating. You were never meant to be perfect. You were meant to be whole. This is what Dostoyevsky saw, and what modern life still refuses to accept. That freedom is not comfort. That truth is not efficiency. That love is not transaction. That being alive means embracing your contradictions, not erasing them. We were never meant to live lives that made sense on paper. We were meant to live lives that meant something, even if that meaning tore us apart first. Modern society tells you that you can be anything, but subtly punishes you for being something real. It celebrates uniqueness, as long as it's marketable. It preaches authenticity, but rewards performance. And so you spend years trying to become what you think you're supposed to be, only to realize, too late, that you've betrayed the very thing that made you human. Your soul. But here's the twist, the truth that cuts through the illusion like a blade. You don't find your soul, you remember it. It was there in childhood, when you laughed without needing a reason, cried without shame, created without fear of judgment. It was there in suffering, when the pain cracked you open and something deeper looked out through your eyes. It was there in love, not the filtered kind, but the wild, terrifying kind that strips you of ego and leaves only raw presence. You remember it in moments when the noise fades, when the performance stops, when you're not trying to be anything at all, and yet you feel more yourself than ever. This is what Dostoyevsky's characters encounter at their breaking points, not destruction, but all revelation. Raskolnikov, in Crime and Punishment, doesn't find redemption through law or punishment. He finds it in love, in suffering, in the unbearable truth of his guilt. The moment he allows himself to feel, to confess, to be seen, he begins to awaken, because that's the soul's deepest hunger, not for pleasure, not for success, but for truth. Man is broad, too broad. I'd have him narrower. The underground man Dostoyevsky knew. We are not meant to be tidy. We are vast, conflicted, haunted, luminous. We are sinners and saints, children and warriors, creators and destroyers. And when you finally accept all of that, not to indulge it, but to integrate it, you don't become less human. You become fully human. The paradigm shift, the ultimate truth, is not an idea. It is a way of being. To walk through life as if your choices matter, not because someone's watching, but because your soul is. To suffer consciously, not as a victim, but as a participant in your own becoming. To live as if your life is sacred, not because of religion, but because existence itself is a miracle. This is why Dostoyevsky's work feels like prophecy. He saw a future where man would try to outsmart the soul and lose everything in the process. But he also saw another possibility, a harder one, a lonelier one, but a real one, that you can choose. Right now, to stop performing, to stop escaping, to stop chasing validation from a world that doesn't know who you are, and never will, to turn inward and face what you've been running from your whole life, your doubt, your guilt, your brilliance, your terror, your capacity for evil, your longing for God, your hunger for meaning, your wild, wounded, glorious self, all of it, not to fix it, but to be with it, to live with it, to let it guide you back to a life that is yours. The final word, if there is one truth Dostoyevsky left us with, it is this. The soul does not survive by being safe. It survives by being true. And in a world built on illusion, the simple act of living in truth is the most revolutionary thing you can do. So tear the mask, break the silence, let your shadow speak, walk through the chaos, and remember the self you abandoned. That's where your fate begins, not in the script you were handed, but in the